Hey there, everybody. It's Rob. So you may have heard of photographer David Yarrow. He's a pretty famous photographer. Comes from a rich family, so make of that what you will. Personally, when I hear an artist of any sort comes from a rich family, I'm kind of cringing at that because when you're rich, you have all the time in the world and the resources to basically buy into your own fame. This guy's photos, I think more often than not, they're kind of tacky. Uh, Obviously, he has great equipment, so he can take really clear photos. And, well, anyway, that's not the point of this video to judge his work. He was caught harassing foxes in Grand Teton National Park, which is in Wyoming. And right now there's a petition that, up until the publishing of this article on buckrail.com, had over 3,000 signatures to get this douchebag banned for life from American national parks. Now, this guy is from England, and basically they were doing a photo shoot, and from what it sounds, it was a really tacky photo shoot where they were holding guns and dressed in furs and feeding these foxes so they could get close to them for the photos. Absolutely just disgusting behavior from someone who, because he's in this industry of taking wildlife photos, should know better. But especially because he's rich, the pursuit of whatever he feels is needed to be done is all that's important. Doesn't matter, no concern for anyone aside from him. But anyway, buckrail.com. Jackson, Wyoming. Shortly after a fox was euthanized at Coulter Bay, a petition started circulating online to ban professional photographer David Yarrow from entering all national parks after multiple reports came in of him feeding and enticing foxes in Grand Teton National Park. We demand that Yarrow be held accountable by the fullest extent of the law for corroborating in the illegal feeding of a wild animal, the petition says. David Yarrow is a high-profile photographer who many other artists look up to as a role model. By continuing to accept his actions, we award his unethical practices and send the message to other photographers that they can violate national park laws and endanger the lives of their wild subjects without fear of consequences. Now, let me interject here. As you may or may not know, you're not allowed to feed wild animals in national parks. You shouldn't feed wild animals anywhere. But I'll go on. A Jackson resident and photographer told Buckrail that she saw the photographer and his crew feeding and enticing foxes in Coulter Bay earlier last week. I was photographing a fox while a group of men modeled and photographed a stylized shoot with fur and guns about 20 feet away from me. One man circled the area feeding the fox occasionally. After this, the men started photographing two foxes. Photographer Tiffany Taxis said of the incident, the photographer instructed one of the men to use the plastic bag to entice the foxes to come closer. The foxes came within a foot of the photographer and eagerly awaited for food. Then one of the men stated, "You better do what I tell you or I'll take out my gun and shoot you." I simply couldn't imagine how a person could speak to an innocent animal like that. I then discreetly took photographs of the men. The Park Service says that feeding wildlife is actually a form of animal cruelty. Animals that are fed by humans learn to frequent roadsides and parking lots, dramatically increasing their chances of being run over by a careless motorist, or in this case shot by the Park Service. According to the NPS webpage, most animals have very specific natural diets and therefore specific kinds of digestive bacteria. Being fed human food causes the wrong type of bacteria to become dominant in their stomachs. Soon, these animals are no longer able to digest their natural foods, and they end up starving to death with stomachs full of what they should have been eating all along. Taxis later said that she is certain the man she saw in the park was Yarrow. I have collected extensive evidence from Yarrow's Instagram and Facebook profiles, as well as the men he was with, that definitively prove it was him, said Taxis. I also reported the incident to the National Park and filed a witness report. The Park Service is still uncertain whether the fox that was euthanized is one of the same foxes from the alleged feeding incident with Yarrow last week. The euthanized fox was food conditioned and habituated, Gurman said, but I do not know if that fox was involved in that incident or not. The investigation of reports that Yarrow and his crew were feeding foxes is still ongoing. There had been plans to euthanize the fox since last summer, but the fox proved elusive until this week. Regardless of who is feeding or enticing wildlife, not only is it illegal, but it is never a good idea to habituate wild animals for the safety of both them and humans. Park visitors are reminded to maintain a minimum viewing distance of 25 yards from most wildlife and 100 yards from wolves and bears. So there you have it. There's no certainty that the foxes that Yarrow was feeding, that the one that got shot was among them. But that's kind of irrelevant here. Just the fact that he was doing this is extremely problematic and should get him banned for life from U.S. national parks. He's not just some, family out having a picnic that doesn't know the rules or maybe wasn't as aware of how important the rules are. This guy makes a living. Well, not make a living. He made a living from Daddy's shipping business, but I digress. This guy makes a lot of money and he has a lot of fame as a result of going out into wildlife and taking photos of animals. So he needs to face some consequences here, first of all. Second of all, he needs to be punished for this behavior to send a message to all other wildlife photographers and basically anyone that visits national parks that this behavior is wrong and it will not be tolerated.